Hello, my good human. Welcome back to my channel. And if you're new here, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Luana from luanarose.com, and here on my channel, I talk about all things nervous system, health, regulation, trauma healing, and in this video, relationship health. This is part 2 of what is your attachment style. So if you haven't seen part 1, make sure you watch it later on. You don't need to watch these videos in order per se, but I think it's important that you watch the full series so you get a sense of the different kinds of secure and insecure attachment styles. In this video, I'm briefly covering secure attachment, and we're going to talk about disorganized attachment, a little bit about the Potpourri, which is an unofficial attachment style that my colleagues and I talk about. So I found that a lot of the people I work with, when it comes to relationships, either in their romantic sense, with family, at work, a lot of the dynamics there in the important relationships in their life can be tied back to childhood, tied back to those attachment styles and dynamics that they had with their primary caregivers, including any experience of trauma or developmental disruptions. We won't get too deep into that in this video, but I will briefly talk about trauma and the disruptions when it comes to the disorganized attachment style in this video. To set the stage, let's briefly talk about secure attachment. So, if you grew up with secure attachment, your parents were a place of safety and support. You know you could go to them and they would support you with whatever you were going through. Your needs were met. They were this safe base that when you were a baby, they would attune to you, match your facial expressions, and coo to you, give you appropriate amounts of touch and loving care and support, snuggles. When you were a toddler, you were confident enough to have them sitting next to you and then crawl away into the room and explore the area around you, or if you were at a park, you could run away and chase the ducks, let's say, and look back, and mom or dad or grandpa, grandma would still be there, and you would be okay because you knew that they had your back. They had your needs in their best interests, and they would be there to protect you and step in case anything went sideways. Your caregivers responded to you in an appropriate way, in an appropriate amount of time, so if you called them, they would respond, whether that was in childhood or later on as a teenager. If you had a problem, you would go to them and you wouldn't be afraid of their reaction or if they were going to be upset. You would just be confident in taking an issue to them and expecting that they would help you work through whatever your learning edge would be at the time. So that's secure attachment. And later on in life, if we have secure attachment, we'll be attracted to people, whether that's in work situations or in romantic relationships, etc., friendships, that the people that we're interacting with, they respond in the same way. We have the expectations that they'll protect us, they will fulfill our needs appropriately, and they won't be a source of threat or confusing communication or essentially danger. They're going to have our back, and we're going to feel like we can lean on them when we need to. So if you want to know more about secure attachment, make sure you watch the other videos that I did on secure attachment, what it means, and how to create it for yourself. So let's move on to disorganized attachment. What it can look like in childhood. Well, children with this sort of attachment style can be seen as the quote-unquote problem child. They can swing from being able to be in connection and then have their, autonomic nervous system go into a high arousal response, like anxiety or fear wrapped up in there, and also go into that deep dorsal shutdown, so need to retreat and be disengaged from connection. So there's high highs and low lows, and as children, there's often this sense, if it's not outwardly spoken, at school or within the family unit, of having, this is a terrible label, but we hear it, of having a problem child. It just means that there's quite a lot of nervous system dysregulation going on, and there's this fear threat response circuitry that's pretty much always on, which creates the sense of disorganization internally, and therefore, of course, it's going to present externally as well. So in childhood, this individual with a disorganized attachment style can have struggles with learning. The individual can feel sluggish socially, it's hard to interact with others, our motor response skills are limited. It's a challenge to self regulate for the child's system to regulate itself, and it's also a struggle to co regulate, to feel safe enough to rest and relax in the company of another human. This child or human will also have struggles reading people. They can misread a kind face, or they can misread facial expressions. A common one is just a neutral facial expression. They can interpret it as a threat, or have an internal fear response to that more neutral facial expression. In many ways, the disorganized attachment style is a mix of the anxious ambivalent attachment tendencies and the dismissive avoidant tendencies. And underlying that is, of course, autonomic nervous system dysregulation and fear in the nervous system, particularly fear within the relational field. So someone asked a question in the comments of part 1 of this video of is there something in between ambivalent and dismissive avoidant? And yes, it's all in a spectrum, a continuum, and this disorganized style or tendency is kind of the both of these worlds. A hallmark of disorganized attachment is confusion in communication. Just like the word disorganized, there's this confusion in communication internally and also externally with others. So there's this kind of simultaneous come here, go away signals from the parents, and later on, of course, that carries on into adulthood, like that come closer but go away feeling that we can get when we're moving into a romantic relationship, or even with friendships, is like come closer, go away, and it's confusing, of course. It's a double bind, there's mixed signals, and the baseline for that is confusion. And of course, that's stressful on our system, on our autonomic nervous system. A classic example of that in childhood, I worked with this woman once, and she shared a story of her mom. These are her words, expression of it is her mom had OCD, so was quite meticulous about the cleanliness of the house. So one of her duties was to clean the house, vacuum the living room, and do dusting and all that once a week. So she would do this, the child, who was like 7, 9, around there, and her mom's response to the first time she did it was words like, you're not doing it right, it's not good enough, you should have done it this way, you shouldn't have done it that way. So from the parent gave unclear directions. She basically said, get the task done, and the child, the little girl, ended up, feeling ashamed, feeling like there was no proper leadership, and then was shamed after for quote unquote not doing a good job because there wasn't clear guidance on how to get the task done. So when I was working with this individual, we really had to go slow and kind of weave out the confusion that was created from that dynamic with her mom and cleaning in childhood. And that's just one incident. Folks with disorganized attachment style or tendencies, just like from this example that I shared, it can be daunting to try new things. It can be scary to be creative. It can be scary to take risks, because in childhood that was it was a stressful environment and also confusing environment to be in. So we don't have the capacity in our system to be creative or take risks per se. It's also one of those attachment systems that will find loopholes in situations because they had to in order to survive as a child. If the parent, another hallmark was threat. So if the parent, hit, slapped, or physically or verbally threatened or abused the child, the parent is supposed to be the secure base, the safe haven we go to for comfort. But if that parent also switched and became a threat and danger, it's very confusing for a child to have to wake up every morning and deal with that. So, of course, for the child's survival, they will have to figure out loopholes, ways of appeasing, ways of, changing their words to make things seem a certain way in order to essentially survive at home. So, it can be incredibly taxing on a person's system to grow up like this. And then later on in life, we'll find loopholes in pretty much any situation to, it can appear or it can be manipulative or, manipulative, because loopholes and manipulation are essentially the same thing. It's really tragic because the person has to live with their survival physiology, that fight, flight, freeze, fawn response going all the time as an underlying thing that they do in their life, and it's all unconscious because it's survival based. It's the brainstem, the lower part of our brain, that just kicks in, and we have to do it to survive. So that becomes the norm for relationships. Physiologically, the child has learned neuroceptively that relationships are meant to be dangerous and confusing. So later on in adulthood, folks with disorganized tendencies and a high threat response running their system will be drawn to relationships that evoke that same sense of confusion, instability, and essentially disorganization, danger. This is why we can find ourselves being attracted to people or environments that aren't necessarily good for us, but it's all we know, so it's the norm. So it's kind of one of those scenarios of, if we don't know better, then we can't take care of ourselves in a better way. Let's shift gears here, and I'm going to offer you 2 examples of the combinations we can have with disorganized tendencies. So this first example is dismissive avoidant disorganization. So I worked with this person, I'm going to call him Trevor for this video, and this person experienced that growing up, dismissive, disorganized attachment style, particularly with his father. So when he came to me, he would describe it as feeling this need to withdraw, feeling this need to shut down, or not this need, he would shut down, his physiology would shut down, and he would kind of go, depending on the spectrum, go into this depression or depressive state of not wanting to do anything and no energy. He grew up with a father that was verbally and physically abusive, and he would drink, and when he got drunk, those verbal and physical abuse would increase, and he tended to have a task-based kind of bond with his father, and he played a lot of sports, so soccer, hockey, bike races, and if Trevor wouldn't do well in, let's say, he didn't score a goal at the football field or soccer field for his team, and maybe his team lost, or maybe his dad's perception was that he didn't do good enough. When they would drive in the car on the way home, the dad would essentially dismiss him, give him the cold shoulder, not talk to him, sometimes for days. And later on in life, Trevor experienced any sort of, high-pitched noises, anyone yelling as trigger to that threat response in his system of going into shutdown, withdrawing from life, and becoming depressed and having anxiety. So anything in his life that kind of reflected some sort of not being good enough or the fear of failure would spiral his system into withdrawal, and his autonomic nervous system basically going into a threat response of that fear and shutdown. So we figured this out together by working one-on-one, talking about it, and over time he became less sensitive to high-pitched noises and also people talking in different tones, because his neuroception, his ability to feel safety, really expanded within himself. So that's one example of dismissive avoidant disorganization that can show up in life. Example number 2, disorganized ambivalent. So this was another person that I worked with. We're going to call her Cynthia in this video. And she started a long distance relationship with this person. And she came to see me kind of around the same time. So she would often hear from the person she started seeing that she was clingy, obsessive, and too needy. And looking through the lens of disorganized, anxious, ambivalent, we were talking about her history, and she was abandoned by her mom at birth, so as a baby, and her greatest fear was being abandoned again. So, through working together, we figured out that this was her attachment style, her fears, and we worked with what that feels like in her body and helping her grow a bigger capacity for feeling safe. And she would often text this person she started to date, and they would text back less than she would be reaching out. Kind of a classic of the anxious, ambivalent. Are you still there? Are you still there? Please don't abandon me. It's kind of the thoughts that she shared was having. So she chatted with this person she was seeing in the long distance relationship and shared her attachment tendencies, that fear of abandonment, this anxious, ambivalent kind of tendencies she was working through, and he understood, and they kind of worked it out and could do a beautiful repair. So instead of him complaining that she was clingy and anxious and needy, they were able to figure out kind of a rhythm that was best for having, phone calls, chats, and texting kind of in a different flow. So that's one example of someone that overcame their anxious, ambivalent, disorganized tendencies. Let's shift gears, and I'm going to tell you what the disorganized attachment style needs in order to overcome these tendencies and really just have an easier way of being in relationship. So I probably sound like a broken record by now when it comes to regulation and building that regulation, but it's true. The disorganized tendency person really needs to learn self-regulation, co-regulation, and build that internal sense of safety, because it is the exact opposite of what they got in childhood. Even in childhood, if there was this sense of dysregulation or fear that kind of was a field around the caregiver, that person can only become as regulated as their caregiver. So regulation, regulation, regulation for the disorganized person, and clear communication. Clear communication is such a relief to the person that grew up with the need to jump through loopholes and the need to navigate confusing communication in childhood. So clear communication, consistency, and self and co-regulation are my go-to ingredients for healing from disorganized attachment. And a little segue into the potpourri. So the potpourri is an attachment style that my colleagues and I kind of came up with. I don't know who exactly it was. Whoever it was, if you know who first said the potpourri, please comment below. But basically the potpourri is like what was on grandma's coffee table. Is there's a little bit of everything. So some folks resonate with the potpourri attachment style, which is not in any other book, or you probably can't even Google it. But basically it's if we have a little bit of everything. If we maybe experience secure attachment with grandma, mom was anxious, ambivalent, dad was avoidant, and maybe we had like 3 teachers at school that were secure. So that kind of creates this potpourri within us. And again, coming back to kind of the foundations of secure attachment, which go watch that video on how to create secure attachment for yourself. That'll be kind of the remedy for the potpourri attachment style, and just accepting that it's very human to experience different qualities of relationships growing up and also in adulthood. And ultimately, we want to have that internal sense of safety and secureness within ourselves because it makes life a lot easier and more enjoyable. You have fun, or you have energy for the things that you want to do, the things that are actually fun, because you don't have to live in survival mode anymore. And lastly, if you have children or if you want to have children, you can give that secure sense of self to your children by mirroring it and leading them into their own secure identity within themselves. So that wraps up part 2 of what is your attachment style. I hope you learned something new in this video. If you're new here, make sure you're subscribed, you like this video, and turn on those post notifications. I upload every Wednesday, and I really appreciate that you took the time to watch this video. Make sure you comment below if you learned something new. If you have any questions, I'm happy to jump in the comments and answer them for you. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you very soon.